Okay, so I've added some of the darker shadows. Some are blue, that's still a little bit wet. Some are more of this ultramarine and burnt umber color. Others are a little bit greener. And this kind of gives just a variety of different shades in the water because there's so many different kinds of reflections and shadows that can be found in water. So now I'm going to be adding some more blue. This is kind of like a sky blue, and I'm going to include it so that we kind of get the sense of kind of a sunny day, sunny sky quality. Okay, so I get a little bit of water, mix it with, kind of liquefy that light blue a little bit more. And now I'm going to start adding these kind of sky blue areas. This is more of a mid-tone, and then I'll be adding some additional bright blue highlights on top of that. The biggest problem for artists who are getting used to painting, really with any media, is that there's a tendency to think that putting one layer down will suffice. Create a complex textural foundation, and it doesn't. So you have to learn to kind of break it down and add layers of color that can build on one another and create kind of a rich surface. So I'm actually going to pull this into the duck's head a little bit, just to make it a little bit more consistent, so I don't have a halo around the duck. By the way, this is not fancy paper. It's actually just a thick drawing paper. Painting on watercolor paper is a little bit easier. But obviously it's not the only choice. Okay, now we'll let that dry. Okay, a couple areas are still a little bit damp, but for the most part this is dried. I added a couple more little brush strokes of dark in the darkest shadows, and now I'm going to start adding some of the highlights. And this is a way of kind of brightening and building that texture that I was talking about of the background. So I'm going to add a little bit of water to my brush, and then I have this lighter blue that's a lighter sky blue. Notice that as gouache dries, it gets a little bit more muted, and that's just one of the qualities of gouache that you just have to kind of take into account. These little details can help kind of breathe life into your painting. Now I don't want to lose this drawing of the foot too much, so I'm not going to layer quite as much as I will eventually in that area. Okay, so that has kind of added a little bit of shimmer. Now when that dries, I'll add some even lighter highlights. In the meantime, I actually am going to go ahead and work on this leg a little bit. Buffleheads have kind of a pinkish orangish leg, and I'm just going to add a little tiniest bit of pink mixed with a little bit of brown. Most of that's going to be underwater, and so you're not going to see it real clearly, but I just don't want to lose that and not know where it is. I'm not going to put it in real darkly, and actually this duck also, the female, also has her leg. They're kind of broken up because they are under the water, but I'm going to go ahead and put those in now. Alright, and now that'll dry a little bit more. Okay, so now that I have the basic midtones, the darks, and some of the highlights, but not the brightest ones, I'm going to add just a little bit more, and then I might add some watercolor pencils. And the reason I'm going to do that is, first of all, watercolor pencils are pretty much gouache in solid form that you add in details, and so I'm going to do that for this. But before I do that, I'm going to add a little bit of white to the areas that need it in particular. So I'm going to add, so we can see it, but it's kind of hidden underneath. And I'm going to do the same thing with this one. Whoops, kind of. Notice that when you don't have enough water, it ends up getting kind of like a dry brush quality to it. Notice that the white gouache dries quite a bit lighter, less intense, and so you have to kind of layer it a little bit more. And that's another reason that we might use a little bit of watercolor pencils. Okay, and now we'll let that dry. Okay, so I'm going to leave it like this for now, and then once I paint more on the ducks themselves, I'll look at the overall kind of unity or harmony of the whole image and see if I need to add a little bit to the water. Alright, so a couple of things that are good to keep in mind. Let me show you my reference again, see if, okay. You see how this reference, it isn't entirely clear when I zoom in exactly all of the details of the bufflehead drake. So what I'm going to do is use some supplemental references that are from the internet. I'm not going to be showing those because they are under copyright, but I'm just looking at like specific parts of them, like just for the eye or just for some details on the beak, while I'll be using this as the basis for that. And that's just something to kind of keep in mind when you are painting, that it can be useful to use supplementary references that you're just using them to make sure that you have all of the details, but you're not using them for the overall design or the main reference. Okay, so buffleheads, which is one of the things that isn't shown on my reference image, are not just solid black, but this whole area of the drake is actually iridescent. And so I'm going to add a few basic colors underneath, and then I'll be adding the black on top of that. Okay. So for this, for some of the areas, I'm going to be using the magenta and the cyan. Actually, I think this is my cyan. Okay, so there's the cyan. Then here's the magenta. Okay, do you see how beautiful and brilliant that purple is? Okay, so that is going to be the foundation layer, and then I'll be adding some black on top of that. Okay, and then I'm going to mix up a mixture of blue and brown for the beak or the bill, excuse me. Notice that I'm kind of careful not to touch those colors that I've just added, because it will bleed into that area, and I don't really want that. Okay, and then looking at this area, I actually want to pull this blue and green up just a touch. Okay, so that is kind of the foundation layer for my the bufflehead drake. I'm going to kind of blend this just a little bit. And in looking at this, I can see that I kind of want a little bit more contrast right behind the head here, so that the white will kind of stand out. And so I'm going to take this opportunity to increase the shading directly behind the head right in here. And I'm also going to pull, I didn't quite get all of the blue there, so I'm going to add that there. Okay. I'm going to use this mixture that's kind of that dark blue. Okay, so you see how that kind of helps that come forward a little bit, and that will be helpful. Now I'm going to work a little bit on the female duck, the picture that I have of her. This is the bufflehead hen, and notice that she's not really iridescent at all. Okay, she's just different tones of brown, and it's a beautiful kind of deep, rich brown. And I have a couple of different browns in this set. I'm going to mix up one that is kind of like a really, really deep, dark brown, because it's going to be mixed with blue. Okay, so this is almost a black. So I'm going to leave that for the, kind of detailed highlights. This is a green. I'm going to add a little bit of red to that to kind of soften it. Okay, so I have this really dark nut brown, then I have this that's almost black. I'll go ahead and mix a little bit of this to turn it a little bit orange, or a little bit brown. So I have some nice variations of brown here. Okay, so I'm going to do the same approach with this little hen, and I'm going to use a little bit of ochre. Once again, I'm kind of creating that underneath layer. She has like a little patch of white on her cheek. And then she has some white or really strong highlights along her back, so I'm not going to put any of the brown there, but I am going to put it in the areas where there's more, there are more dark grays and black shades. Okay, now underneath here there's going to be a little bit of more of a kind of a grayish color. Whoops. Don't want to have too much on my brush, and I don't want it to be too wet. For him, I'm going to create a little bit of definition with that same gray, starting out light. This is actually a transparent approach, adding these lighter shadows first. Okay, then that's a shadow there. Now once again, I can see that this edge here needs to be a little bit more defined, a little bit darker shadow behind him. Okay, so now I'm using some watercolor pencils and just kind of blocking in areas with this, let's see, this one's called Bark, and so it's a really, really dark, kind of a charcoal brown. And I'm drawing on top of the blues and purples and everything. Then I'm going to take my small paintbrush with a little bit of water in it, and I'm just going to kind of go over this. There's not a lot of water on this brush, so I have a lot of control, and I'm able to blend out, kind of rinsing it, and then I'm dabbing it on the paper towel. Okay, so I'm going to leave that as it is for now, and I'll come back to it to add a little bit more detail, especially to the bill, but also to some of these areas, and I'm going to start working on her.